question. What's the number one thing that's stopping you from being seriously vulnerable with your partner? When we're talking about opening up emotionally with your spouse, with your lover, with the person who should be your best friend, why is it so difficult to get to that place that I think we all want? We all want deeper intimacy, but something usually is holding us back from being as risky as we should be, to dive into saying, here's what I'm really thinking. This is what I'm really feeling. Here's what I really want. Let me just block and let it out. Something holds us back. And we're going to talk about some ways, some very practical ways for you to break past that fear and get to the next level of really feeling connected within your relationship. We're going to tackle some fears, but we're also going to share with you guys some exciting ways that you can join us for a deep dive into emotional and sexual intimacy at our virtual event coming up February the 2nd.
Yes, so welcome back to the Baloney Podcast. We are your hosts, Sean and Lanette Reed, and we're so excited to sit down with you or to sit next to you, maybe while you're driving to work or whatever. This podcast is all about helping you identify the lies that you're believing, or the baloney that we call it here on this podcast. And we're helping you get to a place to where you are leaving a legacy. And today, like Sean said, we're going to be talking about how to become that vulnerable spouse. And so we're going to be debunking some common myths about vulnerability. And hopefully by the end of this podcast, you're going to be like, you know what? I want to be that vulnerable spouse.
Yeah. So don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you have not yet, and follow us on social media at Sean
as social.
Read, yeah, social media. They know what we're talking about, because you need more life-changing strategies. Now, what vulnerability is? We need to start off with defining exactly what that is, because sometimes I think people could mistake brutal just honesty.
Yes.
Just saying whatever you want, you know what I mean, as vulnerability. So being blunt, razor sharp tongued, harsh is not necessarily vulnerability. Mm-hmm. So the definition of I'm just keeping it real, that may not necessarily be the safest definition of what vulnerability is.
We would actually define that as transparency.
Somebody might see that as transparency, but it may just be rude. It may just be rude and callous, especially when it's not, and this is really important. So you want to always be honest, right? But it needs to be filtered through mercy. And so if your honesty can't be filtered through merciful honesty or upgraded to merciful honesty, I like that. Another way of thinking about it is, if the truth isn't spoken in love, then it's going to come out. It really is just either harsh critique, putting somebody down. Yeah. Or in some way blindsiding somebody who may not be expecting that, and then you call it, you just can't handle who I am, and it's just kind of like, that's not really the vulnerability that we're talking about today. So when we're talking about vulnerability, I think Brene Brown, she has the best definition for it. She's talking about the risk of uncertainty, where you're brave enough to face the risk of uncertainty and divulge to someone something that's private, something that's personal, something that's real about who you are, whether it be your feelings, your preferences, your cares, something that's on your heart. And you want to be able to share that thing, and you may not be able to control the outcome, but you want to still show up and be seen. That's really what vulnerability is. I don't know what you're going to do with what I give you or what I share with you, but real vulnerability is when I'm brave enough to divulge that thing to you, and I'm hoping that you're going to be a safe space. So in relationships, obviously that means you're sharing your thoughts, you're sharing your feelings, you're sharing your hopes and your dreams, your fears, and you don't really know how your partner's going to respond with all of that. So the question really is, why is it so dang hard for us to be vulnerable with one another? And I think a large part of it is many of us have fears of rejection. We have fears of embarrassment. We have fears of being hurt, that person might not steward what it is that we're giving them. And in some cases, you may not have been raised in a home where vulnerability was present, so it may seem weak.
Yeah, like kind of going back to the past or how you were raised. Maybe in the past you tried to share your feelings or share your thoughts with someone, but you got hurt or you got dismissed. And so it kind of, you built up a resistance to vulnerability, right? And so now when you're with the people who you should be vulnerable with the most, it's kind of like what you said, you've got this risk factor. And I think when it comes to your spouse, there shouldn't be a risk factor. And so if you have a hesitation to share what you're thinking or what you're feeling, that is a sign that you're not vulnerable with your spouse. And for whatever reason, you have to chase it down and discover, why can't I be vulnerable? Because it could be a you problem, but then it also could be a marital issue in the sense of the marriage is just not a safe place to be vulnerable.
I think one of the biggest things that hinders vulnerability is your memory, and if somebody broke trust by sharing, you came to them and you shared something that was deeply personal. Next thing you know, the in-laws knew all about it. The best friend knew all about it. Somebody at church knew all about it. You know what I mean? That right there is like, come on, man. If your spouse or the person you're dating or engaged to be married to comes to you and they're sharing something, it could be your kids, it could be your best friend, and you go to them and you share something that's deeply personal, and you're being honest and you're transparent with them, and next thing you know, they're sharing it with somebody else, and then somebody, it's like, come on, man. What we say, loose lips sink ships. The last thing you want to do is go to somebody and trust with them something that's deeply personal to you, and then they break that trust by going and telling it to everybody else. Yeah,
we get that a lot as we're coaching couples, like trust is broken, right? That vulnerability factor is just not there because of the loose lips. And just one of the things that we encourage couples, if that is one of their issues that they're dealing with, is y'all need to agree on, if there is something going on between us, right? Y'all need to agree on who is going to be able, who can you share that sensitive information with, and don't tell anybody else outside of that.
So case in point, if it's something that we're talking about, let's say sexual intimacy, if you're not speaking with your sex therapist that both of you have approved of, then that's not something that you divulge to anybody else. You keep that deeply personal, sensitive information to yourself.
Right.
Because that could be like really hurtful if you turn around and you share somebody's secrets with whomever, your best friend or somebody that you just want to chat about. So I do think that, the stewardship of our spouse's intimate secrets, deep thoughts, or, you're in a relationship and all of a sudden you're getting warning signs that this person isn't safe. One of the ways that you know that they're not safe is because, again, if I'm talking about the responsibility of the hearer, the listener, if that person just dismisses what you're thinking, are you too emotional? Oh, that's dumb. Why are you even thinking like that?
Or ignoring you while you're talking.
Oh man, that one's brutal. And so it's like all of a sudden, these are multiple ways that kill the development of vulnerability within a relationship. And so if you are the listening spouse, the listening boyfriend, or, person who's in love with somebody and you are so into the game that you can't listen. And I do think there's a time and place for you to share intimate information. But some of us, I'm so serious, man. It's like you said with couples that we coach, they have very little time for one another to have intimate, meaningful conversations. They're just not having them. It's amazing. By the time work, kids, hobbies, chores, all this other stuff is done, social media, scrolling, whatever else, there hasn't been much time made for deep conversation.
I think you did a research, and this was years ago, so I'm pretty sure the number has dwindled. But you did an average 20 minutes a week? Where couples...
less than 25 minutes of intimate conversation per week for couples.
Yeah, so by the time you talk about what are we eating, who needs to go grocery shopping, little Bobby's got to be picked up, my mama's sick, right? You talk about those things. There's no way in the world within 25 minutes that we're talking about my most vulnerable, intimate, challenging thoughts. Like, no way.
But I think part of the reason, though, why people probably, I'm starting to realize, I don't think people prioritize these types of conversations, but now I'm also thinking to myself that people are avoiding them. I think the reason why there's little focus and emphasis on the intimate conversations that really build a relationship, because the whole point in talking about vulnerability right now is because
closeness.
This is how you make the relationship amazing. Like if you want better sex, you need to have better conversations.
Right.
And
we're like, dang, I gotta talk to have better sex.
Absolutely. And the thought process is when a person stops pursuing vulnerability, there's a reason. It's not just magically falling off. It's off because there is some form of hurt, misunderstanding, a lack of trust, a sense of, I can't trust this person with my inner thoughts in my inner world. So now you drift. I think one of the best phrases that I think that a person could really memorize and just chew on after y'all leave this podcast, just think through this. You can measure intimacy by distance. You can measure intimacy by distance. So if I really want to know how intimate we are right now, what's the distance between our conversations? What's the distance, the gap that exists between me sharing my innermost thoughts and my desires of my heart or my fears or my concerns, whatever it is?
So the lack of sexual intimacy is almost a symptom
Absolutely.
of a bigger problem.
Absolutely. The lack of sexual intimacy, the lack of emotional intimacy, sometimes it's due to physical constrictions that may be there within the relationship. But most time, the fall off is for a reason. A healthy sex life is usually going to be attached to a very healthy, intimate, emotional connection.
Can you dive into, and maybe I'm skipping ahead, I don't know, because we probably would have made our way back to it, but since we're here already, can you dive into what a spouse should do if their relationship doesn't feel safe for vulnerability?
I think you have to get to your core reasoning on why it doesn't feel safe, because it's one thing to have kind of a gnawing or nagging in the back of your mind, like of trepidation, like I'm really apprehensions in saying something that's just so simple. Hey, can we have sex tonight? Like that shouldn't be a hard thing to say. But if or a person saying, hey, can we go for a walk? Like, why does that ask feel like it's gonna cost you something? That's not healthy. So like whenever all of a sudden something simple, hey, you got a booger on your nose. Like if that's taxing or you feel like,
thank you.
Can we talk about the budget? If that feels weighty, we got problems. And Lanette and Sean can help you with those problems.
Yeah.
Y'all need to reach out to us like ASAP, because these are simple things. If we want to talk about, hey, I don't like how you disciplined the kid the other day.
Yeah.
Or I think your mom is a little nosy and we need to talk about how we can set some healthy boundaries. Mm-hmm. So if you feel like that's going to cause like a fight, a big commotion, or again, it just takes like so much, you got to build up the strength to go in and have this conversation, then it means one or two things. Either the person hasn't been a safe space for you in the past and your trepidations, or you have a personal issue with being afraid to share, and it may not even be your spouse's fault.
Sure.
It may just be a personal fear of rejection, and you may be reading into behaviors, or you're reading into the lack of a certain response that you anticipate. And that's a big deal.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, while we're there, I want to invite you guys to our virtual event, because we're going to be talking more on this topic. And so if you want to dive in a little bit more, I want to invite you on February 2nd at 6:00 p.m. Central Time. We are hosting the Unstoppable Love virtual event. We're going to be talking about sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy. So make sure you go to SeanandLanette.com. I'll also have a link in the show notes, but it's only $20 per couple. So we're really trying to help some people. And then we also, we always do PDFs and downloads and all that stuff. So you're actually going to get some things to take away and to use after the conference. So make sure you sign up.
Yeah, and we're going to have Q&A. It's going to be fun. Yeah,
it's going to be real personal. Yeah. So even though it's going to be a good group of people, we're still going to make it very interactive.
Yeah. So I want y'all to think about, like, if vulnerability, as you're hearing this, some of you all are like identifying, God, like, this is my living room. This is my bedroom right now. This is exactly what I'm dealing with. I want you all to do this, practically take a small step towards vulnerability. And I want you to do that first by just examining yourself to see, is this a situation where I'm misreading their response? I think for a long time, personally, that was my issue. I did have a big fear of rejection in my life that had nothing to do with you. So it wasn't about, oh, you betrayed a trust or you overly criticized me or anything else like that. Not to say that you ain't ever did that, but I'm saying that this was separate from that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So this was a situation where my fear of negativity towards me caused me to read everything about your body language, facial expressions, micro expressions. Like those things for me were big, huge, like tells. So I was looking for signs of safety. And if you didn't give a certain facial expression, or if it didn't seem like you were all in or really focused in on what I was saying, your micro expressions that you had no clue, they were, for me, dramatic turnoffs to vulnerability. So for me, I would shut down. And so that wasn't necessarily something you could fix for me. You could continue to be a safe space, but that was something I needed to examine and get healed of. And so I would challenge anybody who's listening that maybe you have a similar experience to mine. If you have had that in the past, just know your spouse can't fix that. That's really nothing that they could do. Now, we've had some conversations to where I could tell you, hey, I'm triggered by,
sure,
And for me, it's like, if you're not making eye contact when we're having a conversation, for me, that is a trigger. So it's not like you have to dance around it, but you can respect it and kind of honor, like, hey, let me make sure I give him my undivided attention. And that for me feels like safety. So those are things that I'm saying, like, start small. Just kind of examine some of your own behaviors first before pulling out the magnifying glass and pointing out all your spouse's, flaws when it comes to vulnerability, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Like, the thing about vulnerability is you can't expect an immediate response. You can't control the person's response when it comes to vulnerability. So if Sean did ask me to, hey, when I'm talking to you, what helps me is if you're making eye contact. If right then and there, if I said no, or if I said, well, you can't control me, or if I just took it the wrong way, right? He can't control what my response is, but he still has to be vulnerable for his emotional health. So what I'm saying is, you can't control the outcome, but as long as you say things in love, as long as you share your heart, because regardless of how the other person receives you or not, you need to be emotionally healthy.
Yeah, you can't keep holding in and holding in and holding in. I agree with that. I think that what I would encourage anyone to do, again, if we're starting small, you may not need to divulge your whole life story to your spouse, but if you guys have been somewhat estranged in this area and it doesn't feel very connected and deeply intimate, then start small. Say, hey, can we have a 15-minute, call it pillow talk, couch time, porch time, whatever you want to call it. Can we just sit and talk for like 15 minutes?
Yeah, I've been thinking about some things and I just want to share them with you.
Yeah.
And you can just share one thing.
One thing. Don't go through everything, but just, hey, I want to talk to you about some of the things that's been stressing me out on my job.
Yeah.
And tell them you need their undivided attention. And if they struggle with that, have them listen to this podcast episode.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the goals that I would say to both people is stay focused on like one thought a little bit and give each other time to speak, but don't anticipate a certain response to make you feel like, oh, this is deep. We're connecting deeply. And what I mean by that is, let's say immediately I say something to Lanette and I'm like, hey, man, I've been really stressed out this week and I feel a little deflated because things ain't going my way, yada, yada, yada. And then I stop and she doesn't immediately say anything. Like, it doesn't mean that she's not here with me.
Yeah.
Like, let her think.
They got to process.
What I mean?
What I would say is, whatever you say, whatever your response is, let it be empathetic. Mm-hmm. So, like, you can say, heard, baby, I got you.
Yeah.
Like that.
How can I help?
How can I help? I'll pray for you. I just want you to know I love you. Like, those small phrases could mean so much to a person who had to build up the energy to share what's on their heart. Mm-hmm. And so for you to say, heard, baby, I got you.
Yeah. I got so many thoughts. Because I think what happens sometimes, like for what you just gave, is the empathetic conversations piece of it. I think to give that kind of a response, If you are the listening spouse, and you haven't been able to do that, or if you're dating or you're in a romantic relationship and you haven't been able to do that recently, it may be because you're holding a grudge. It may be because you are bitter about something, and your relationship can't get better if you still bitter. Hey, put that on a t-shirt. I said your relationship can't get better if you still bitter. And bitterness is something you got to process with God.
Yeah.
Your partner can't go back and undo whatever's been done. And so in order to move forward, you got to let some stuff go. And the only way your relationship is going to get better is if that relationship is moving in health. And the best way to be healthy is you got to eliminate waste. Anything that's wasteful to the relationship, a grudge, unforgiveness, previous hurts, all this other stuff, you got to let that mess go. So all of this that we're kind of giving little nudges and little tips to try to help people get to a place of better vulnerability, all of this leads to better sex. Mm-hmm. If a person doesn't
Is that
feel
the goal?
Absolutely. The goal is sex, and we want it to be amazing. The thing is, though, you don't want to have sex with an enemy. You don't want, especially, and I say this is for men and women, but especially women. I mean, at the end of the day, you can speak about it. But at the end of the day, if you don't feel like a person even wants to talk to you, then why would you want them to touch you?
Right. No, absolutely. So for a woman, and I can't speak for all women, but the majority of women value emotional safety over sexual intimacy. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not speaking for all women. I'm just talking about the majority of women. And you're not weird or the anomaly if you go the other way. But I'm just saying, women value emotional health and safety. And when they feel secure, when they feel loved, when they feel like they're not on an island, we are more prone to open up. We are more prone to give you exactly what you need in the bed.
Come on here, somebody.
So talk to a sister.
That's fantastic. All the brothers should be willing to talk right now, and the goal is to actually want to talk to your wife.
Right.
So I'll leave y'all with this other thought, and I don't want y'all to forget the whole event that we're doing is about building emotional and sexual intimacy. If you want to get some really deep tips and breakthrough, then you don't want to miss the event. February 2nd, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. It's going to be 3 hours long. We're doing Q&A.
Yeah. It's
going to be funny. It's going to be real, but we're also going to help you guys get some breakthrough. Don't forget, link in the show notes. You can also go to SeanandLanette.com. You can follow us on our socials. Click the link. $20 per couple. We want you to be a part of it. This is our way of pouring into couples and helping you guys get to breakthrough. So make sure that you do what you got to do to get to the next level. Yeah. You feel what I'm saying? What would it take for you to open up about one small thing that you've been struggling with or thinking about personally with your spouse or with your significant other? What would it take? And I mean that from two perspectives. One, I would say, what would it take for you to do it? To be brave enough to risk the uncertainty and to share something that's very personal. Secondly, what would you need from them? Because sometimes the other person is not trying to harm you, even though you may feel like they are. Maybe they just don't know how to steward your vulnerability in a way that makes you feel safe. And that all that is a matter of tweaking.
Yeah.
So I would speak to the self-assessment. If you could, how would you approach, all right, once you assess, man, I would need my spouse to be more attentive or empathetic in response. How would you have them approach, going to their spouse and actually sharing, hey, when I'm opening up, I need you to be like that.
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
No, you just gave a great example. I would do just that. So first off, carving out time where they aren't doing anything, the kids aren't around. So maybe doing this in the evening, maybe doing this over the weekend when the kids are out of the house, or maybe, going out to eat and it's just the two of you and you're just saying, hey, can I talk to you a little bit? I want to be more open and honest and vulnerable with you because I just value our relationship. And one of the things that helps me be better at this is when I'm sharing something with you, if you hear me, if you could say something just to let me know that you're with me. Just let me know that you heard me, and you telling me how much you love me helps me.
Listen, if all that gets said and you don't respond with a healthy amen, or I could do that for you, something's off, man. And I think at the very least, that's just human connection. That's just healthy human connection. And if you're struggling with that, then I want you to reach out to us.
Yeah.
You can reach out to us at info@seanandlanette.com. info@seanandlanette.com, and share with us what it is that you may be dealing with. Ask for help, and we're willing to help you guys. We would love to help you guys out. So obviously emotional intimacy isn't something that's built overnight. Lanette and I, we've been married for 26 years, and we struggled in this area at times. What's ironic though, I just had this thought. When we first got together, we talked for 3 hours.
We did.
Usually either 3 hours when we first met, and then we kept talking for like hours after that.
Yeah, but also if you remember, we did this probably for a good couple months right after we got married. But it'd be late at night. We'll be in the bed, and we'd lean over and say, "How am I doing? What do you need from me? Can I do this better?" So like, it was open, vulnerable communication, even early then. But kind of like what you said, time moves on, things happen, offenses take place, and that vulnerability, you just find yourself growing further and further away. And so being able just to turn around in a quiet, small spot, doing it before you go to bed and just say,
I like that idea.
Hey, babe.
Before you go to bed.
Oh my gosh.
She said it. Do it before you go to bed.
I ain't mean like that.
That's all right. I think that's a great idea.
This is the end of this podcast.
Don't forget about the workshop, guys. It's going to be great. Make sure you sign up for it. Don't forget to subscribe. Make sure you like it if you're on YouTube.
Yep.
Share it with somebody. Leave a comment. We appreciate y'all. Keep loving each other.